On the 15th of June, 2020, at a quiet apartment in Putney, southwest London, British police suddenly raided and arrested two middle-aged men. In one of them was an EncroChat phone, an encrypted messaging platform once considered an impregnable fortress for criminals. Less than 24 hours later, other members of the ring were also controlled one by one. But behind those quiet arrests was a transcontinental drug smuggling plot, operating like a perfect machine for nearly a year, with the goal of bringing 448 kilograms of MDMA worth £45 million from the UK to Australia, by hiding in the arm of a 40-ton excavator. But in the end, it all collapsed, just because of a photo of a pet dog and a few seemingly harmless selfies. In early 2020, as the world grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, a British organized crime group quietly launched one of the most sophisticated intercontinental drug smuggling operations ever recorded. Their aim was to ship nearly 450 kilograms of MDMA to Australia, where the street price is many times higher than in Europe. Estimated total value between £44 and £45 million. Unlike traditional transportation routes via suitcases, containers, or airplanes, this criminal group chose an extremely ingenious and daring method, hiding drugs in a hollow compartment inside the metal arm of a heavy excavator, a Doosan DX 420 weighing up to 40 tons. To legitimize the shipment's route to Australia, the group staged a fake auction on the industrial trading platform Iron Planet, a real website that sells construction machinery. They created fake sales profiles, arranged for winning bidders from Australia, and completed all the customs paperwork to make the shipment look like a normal industrial transaction. To international shipping agencies, it was just an excavator on its way to Sydney, but inside its steel hull, welded shut, lined with lead to prevent scanners and painted like new, was nearly half a ton of synthetic drugs waiting to be mined and distributed on Australia's black market. This was not an isolated crime. Behind the nearly 450 kilogram MDMA haul was a transnational organized crime network, with a tight operating system from planning, transporting, disguising to handing over the goods. The network was divided into two main branches, a hub in the UK, where the planning and concealment of the drugs were carried out, and a hub in Australia, where the drugs were received and exploited. Danny Brown, 55, head of the operation. As the mastermind behind the entire operation, Brown used the pseudonym Throthetis on the encrypted messaging platform EncroChat to secretly communicate with members. With extensive experience in the world of organized crime, Brown was in charge of planning the shipment, contacting international partners, and tracking every step of the shipment. Stefan Baldoff, 64. Baldoff, nicknamed Bold Move, is Brown's close associate. He is the secret liaison with the Australian contact and is responsible for managing internal communications and troubleshooting issues that arise during the implementation process. Philip Lawson, 61 years old, is a camouflage expert engineer. Lawson was the one who directly designed and hid the drug compartment in the excavator arm. He drew up the plan to hollow out the compartment, directed the welding of the compartment, and even hired a company to make industrial signs to hide the welding marks. Leon Riley, 50 years old, was the key link in disguising the shipment. Through his company, Mizzen Equipment, he took over the goods and carried out the official shipping procedures. With a complete set of documents, the excavator took the form of a completely legal industrial shipment. Peter Murray, 59 years old, and Tony Borg, 45 years old. Both were the right-hand men responsible for transporting excavators, bringing drugs to Gray's warehouse and preparing the final steps before delivering them to the port. As for the recipients in Australia, they include Tony Mars, consignee and site operator. As a construction worker in Sydney, Mars acted as the buyer of the excavator on paper. After the goods arrived in Australia, he was responsible for moving the excavator to the site and directly exploiting the storage compartment, according to the diagram from Lawson. Raymond Lipovac, plumber, insider. Lipovac has connections to an outlaw biker gang and that makes him the bridge to receive and distribute the goods after the successful exploitation. The structure is clearly divided. Each person is in charge of a separate link, but closely linked by secret exchanges via EncroChat. At a remote industrial warehouse in Grays, Essex, England, a 40-ton Doosan DX 420 excavator was being handled by Philip Lawson, a key member of a criminal gang. The excavator's steel arm was precisely cut open to create a cavity large enough to hold 210 packets of MDMA, weighing a total of 448 kilograms. To avoid detection by X-ray systems at international checkpoints, the entire drug storage compartment was lined with specialist lead sheets, a concealment technique usually only used in organized drug or arms smuggling. Once the cargo was loaded inside, the compartment was hermetically sealed. The welds were smoothed, a new coat of industrial paint was applied, and fake technical labels were applied to disguise any traces of work. Once the finishing touches were complete, the excavator was handed over to Leon Riley, the legal representative of the Mizzen Equipment Shell Company, for export clearance. With all the contracts, equipment codes, shipping documents, and customs paperwork in place, the excavator was quickly taken to the port of Southampton and loaded onto a bulk carrier bound for Australia. On the 13th of March, 2020, after more than a month of traveling by sea from the port of Southampton, the Doosan DX 420 excavator officially arrived at the port of Brisbane, Australia. On paper, the shipment was completely legal, the result of an international auction on the Iron Planet platform, accompanied by a complete invoice, bill of lading, equipment code, and import documents carefully prepared by the British side. The criminal group, completely confident in the sophisticated cover they had built, had no idea that every step of the excavator had been caught in the sights of the authorities. The Australian Border Force, the Australian Border Control Agency, received a confidential intelligence tip from the British and immediately placed the machine under special inspection. In the industrial screening area, technicians used a high-intensity X-ray system to scan the entire machine. The results confirmed the suspicion. The excavator's steel arm contained a hollow, lead-lined cavity that did not match the original manufacturer's structure, a classic sign of concealed contraband. However, instead of immediately seizing the evidence, the Australian Border Force opted for a more sophisticated counterintelligence tactic. They decided to quietly neutralize the plan by removing all the drugs from the cargo hold, installing a GPS tracking device to track the excavator's further path, and, more importantly, embedding a specialized listening device deep inside the machine. To avoid alerting anyone in the network, the entire storage compartment was then welded back together using high-tech techniques. The welds were smoothed, the surface was repainted in the original industrial color, and the technical labels, which had been forged by the criminal group themselves, were restored. Without leaving any trace that could arouse suspicion from the Australian side, the excavator was released from the port as if it had never been inspected, continuing on its scheduled journey. The consignment was then transported to an industrial auction warehouse in Sydney, and from there to a construction site in Blacktown, some 30 kilometers from the city centre, a location that had been pre-designated by the Australian receiving team. The British syndicate was reassured that everything was going as planned, with no alarms raised. Little did they know that, from the moment the machine cleared customs at the port, every move, every conversation, and every attempt to gain access to the cargo hold were being monitored 24/7 by Australian authorities. In early May 2020, after the Doosan DX 420 excavator had been safely transported from the port of Brisbane to a small construction site in the suburb of Blacktown, west of Sydney, the two consignees, Tony Mars and Raymond Lipovac, began to open the compartment containing the drugs hidden inside the excavator's arm. Based on detailed technical diagrams sent by Philip Lawson from the UK, including drawings, welding instructions, cutting positions, and tools, the two dug into the ground to cover it, using cutters and drills to reach the intended location. But when the last piece of steel was removed, what they saw was not carefully wrapped packages of MDMA, but a suspiciously clean, smooth cavity. They couldn't believe their eyes. so they rechecked other joints, changed the angle of the cut, and even removed more of the steel arm. But the result was the same. The drugs were gone. Panicked, Mars and Lipovac took a photo of the cavity and rushed it to Danny Brown and Stefan Baldauf via the EncroChat app, hoping for further instructions. In England, the team was stunned by the news and immediately responded with more detailed instructions. Check the welds, use a magnetic probe, try to open the joint below. When nothing came of it, the atmosphere among the crew turned to suspicion and fear. Had the Australian consignee embezzled the drugs? Had the cargo been stolen at the port? Was there an insider trader? Brown, Baldauf, and the rest of the crew conducted an internal investigation via EncroChat, messaging constantly, checking schedules, locations, and shipping information, even requesting video of the excavator inspection for verification. What they didn't know was that every image, text message, technical diagram, command, and digital panic was being monitored in real time, second by second, by British and Australian investigators. With absolute faith in the EncroChat encryption platform, they believed that no one would be able to trace them because their entire identities were hidden behind meaningless aliases like Throthetis, Bold Move, or Impact Gold. However, that confidence led to fatal mistakes. One of the most important breakthroughs came from a photo that Danny Brown, the coordinator of the entire operation, sent to his associates via EncroChat. The photo showed Brown's bulldog, Bob, which he kept at home. He did not notice that Bob's collar had a metal tag with a clearly printed emergency contact number, that of Brown's girlfriend. Using that seemingly random detail, investigators were able to trace the phone number back to the owner, and for the first time, link the alias Throthetis to Danny Brown, a man from Bromley, Kent. But it didn't stop there. On another occasion, Brown sent the group a screenshot of a television to share a news report. He didn't realize that his own face was faintly reflected on the dark screen of the television from behind the camera, confirming once again the real identity of the dispatcher. Equally unprepared, Stefan Baldauf, the co-manager of the operation, also sent a photo of a brass plate engraved with his name on the front door of his house, presumably to serve as a sample for a new shipment. What he didn't anticipate was that the shiny metal surface reflected his own face clearly. When investigators scrutinized the image closely, they immediately identified him as the person behind the Bold Move account, the core of the entire network. 3 photos, 3 small details. But for the experts in image analysis and intelligence data, it was enough to completely expose the true identities of the 2 ringleaders. After months of quietly monitoring the gang's every move, British police decided to take action. On the 15th of June 2020, 2 key figures in the ring, Danny Brown and Stefan Baldauf, were arrested at a flat in Putney, southwest London. When he was restrained, Brown was still holding a working EncroChat phone, a golden piece of evidence that helped confirm his role in the entire plot. In the following weeks, the remaining members of the British ring were arrested. Peter Murray, Leon Riley, Tony Borg, and Philip Lawson were all arrested, with evidence gathered from encrypted messages, photographs, location data, and cross-examination. At the same time in Australia, with all the data from the wiretaps and surveillance equipment showing that there was nothing suspicious, the authorities arrested Tony Mars and Raymond Lipovac. Mars claimed that he had accidentally bought the excavator and was forced to open the compartment, but the court rejected this defense, concluding that he knew the purpose of the machine and sentenced him to 8 years in prison. Lipovac claimed that he had been threatened by biker gangs because of his late brother's debt, and although his testimony was partly confirmed, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with a lighter sentence due to alleged pressure from organized crime. Almost 2 years later, on the 6th of December 2022, the case came to trial at Kingston Crown Court. Faced with a barrage of overwhelming evidence, from EncroChat messages, mirror images, drug storage compartment diagrams to GPS data, the jury concluded This was one of the most sophisticated and well-planned MDMA smuggling plots ever uncovered in the UK. The sentences handed down reflected the roles and extent of each defendant's involvement. Stefan Baldoff, who co-directed the operation, received 28 years, the maximum sentence in the case. Danny Brown, who planned and coordinated the operation, received 26 years. Philip Lawson, the engineer who designed the drug chamber and oversaw the camouflage, was sentenced to 23 years. The logistics men, Peter Murray and Leon Riley, who ran the shell company Mizzen Equipment, were each sentenced to 24 years. Tony Borg, who provided technical support at the Essex warehouse, received 15 years. William Sarton, the owner of the warehouse used to store and renovate the excavators, was sentenced to 24 years in prison in a separate trial in December 2024. These harsh sentences not only bring to a close a nearly 3-year investigation, but also send a clear message. No matter how sophisticated the scheme, organized crime will be exposed. The MDMA smuggling case from the UK to Australia not only shows the sophistication, secrecy, and recklessness of modern organized crime, but also clearly demonstrates the power of international cooperation, surveillance technology, and above all, the lesson that no plan is absolutely perfect. What do you think about the sentences for the subjects in this case, especially the 28 years for the ringleader? Is it enough of a deterrent? Leave your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more thrilling real-life cases that you have never heard of.